Hey everybody, I'm Bill Whittle here with my friend Andrew Klavan. Andrew Klavan. You know who Brian Regan is?
Andre, no.
He's a comedian. He's the funniest guy in the world. And he talks about people who like to spell their names in exotic ways. Klavan, is that K-L-A-V-A-N? No, it's C-L-E-Q-U-E apostrophe V-A-U-G-H-N. It's Klavan. It's pronounced Klavan. God almighty.
I'm so pretentious.
Yeah, Andrew, your topic today comes from Marc-Andre Alexander, and his question is, why is Shakespeare as great as he is? Why is Shakespeare great?
Why is Shakespeare great? I love that question because there are people who go around now saying, well, you know, he was a white male and all this garbage. Shakespeare is, in fact, the greatest writer of the English language. In order to understand that, you have to have at least some concept of what it is that art does. I mean, art is a record of the experience of being human. There's no way to put that into words directly. You can't say, I mean, even if you ask a baseball pitcher, what was it like to pitch a no-hitter? He's going to say, oh, it was like waking up on Christmas morning. He's going to give you a metaphor, tell a story. The more complex and deep and rich the story, the more you capture of the inner life. Shakespeare is one of those characters, like Marlon Brando wasn't acting, like Frank Sinatra wasn't singing, who comes along at a crisis point, a turning point, during the Reformation, and he captures not only more of the inner experience of being human with more beautiful language than any other writer will before or since, but he captures it at a moment when the human experience is actually changing. It's actually mutating from what it was in not only in the Middle Ages, but from what it was before that in the classical ages. If you look before Shakespeare, for instance, I don't think you can find a villain in all of literature. What I mean is, in the Greek plays, in the great Greek plays, you know, there are tragic figures, there are figures who do terribly tragic things, but there's no one who says, as Richard III says, you know, something like, I am determined to be a villain. I am determined, you know, I know what's right, I know what's wrong, I've determined to choose the wrong. And that is a very Christian idea, that, you know, you have free will, there is a good and evil, and we can choose, and we do, you know, and we make those choices. And Shakespeare examines things that we're still talking about today. He, you know, his exploration of race and what it means to be a different race, and what it means to hate people for their race, and what it means to be what people hate, is unbelievably deep. I mean, if we understood Othello and the Merchant of Venice, we'd have no more conversations about race if we understand it. And if you look at the essential play, which is Hamlet, you know, Hamlet's a funny play because a lot of people think it's out of order, and in fact, the story doesn't quite make sense. It's very hard to give a plot summary of Hamlet after the third act. You know, it gets very, very messy, and it's hard to talk about the themes and all this stuff. It doesn't matter. The minute Hamlet walks on stage, you know, oh, that it's too solid flesh would melt, you know, we say, oh, that's us. That's not Jason and the Argonauts. That's not Achilles. Yes. It's not Hector. That's us. That's me. You know, and it remains true to this day. Any actor can walk on and read those lines, and whether he's good or bad, you'll say like, oh yeah, I get that. I get what's happening there. So Shakespeare creates more of that experience, and there are critics who say that he created us. But I think it's more that he predicted us. He knew what was going to happen. I can find in Shakespeare all the intellectual trends up to the present moment. I can find them because he understood what was going to happen once the church lost control of the monopoly on truth, you know, and how we were going to be different from the classics and how we'd be the same. An amazing, amazing mind. When I read him, and I read him all the time, it's hard for me to believe that such a character walked the earth. People say, how can you believe in Jesus Christ? It's easier for me to believe in Jesus Christ than in Shakespeare because he was just a man.
Wow, there's some great points there. I never really thought about that, but you're right. Previously, the villains or the forces of tragedy were forces of nature. They were the gods or fate or whatever. And there's Iago whispering in Othello's ear, literally putting poison into his ear and telling him things that he wants to hear but doesn't want to hear. And yeah, the choice for evil, that's all really great. I used to joke about, what are you doing this evening, Bill? Well, I'm going to go back to my den with my smoking jacket and my fez and a nice glass of brandy and catch up on my Chaucer. I used to joke about that all the time. So over the holidays, I decided, well, I might as well read Chaucer. So I read the Canterbury Tales. It was a bit of a read. I had the Old English and the modern translation side by side.
The Old English is really tough.
I liked it so much that I didn't like the book so much, but I want to do a translation of Chaucer, believe it or not. I do. I think there's a great middle ground between the Old English and where he is. But the reason I bring up Chaucer is because This was considered like the classic of the Middle Ages. It was the book.
Yeah, it was the first
and
really great book.
it's shockingly bad.
Oh, no, I love
compared to Shakespeare,
Yeah.
there's nothing there. It's a series of people telling stories, and it's all bawdy, and it's all about this. How many of these stories in the Canterbury Tales is, she was the most beautiful woman who ever lived. Words cannot describe her beauty. Blah, 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 blah. She was chaste and pure. Every single story has that in it. Every single one. And there's a knight, and there's a king, and all this other stuff. This is what you're getting at. The thing about this whole, oh, he's an old dead white male. You are a museum-grade idiot. Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, is not about Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. You don't have to be a prince. You don't have to be Danish. You don't have to live in the 1400s, the 1500s, 1600s. No, it's universal. I do want to just take a quick sidelight and ask you about this. I have become somewhat convinced, and I'm very, very reluctant to get into conspiracy theories, but I've been looking at some of these people who are claiming that Shakespeare was not, that William Shakespeare, the historical character, was not the guy who wrote these.
Right.
And I saw it, Mark Twain was in this camp, Derek Jacobi. There's a couple of pretty compelling pieces of evidence to say it was, I think the lead, I don't buy Francis Bacon, Earl, somebody or other. He was part of Elizabeth's court. He was a lawyer.
Shakespeare?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. And the point of the people are saying is that the historical Shakespeare was basically a former actor, and he was basically a promoter. And I think the most compelling thing is if you look at the doggerel that's on Shakespeare's tombstone, it's just don't leave these bones where they lie, or fie be thy. It's just ridiculous. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yes. First of all, I've always agreed with Woody Allen, who said it wasn't William Shakespeare, it was another guy named William Shakespeare. That was a great line. Yeah, this has its origins in people who thought he was just too lower class, a typically British idea that he was just too lower class to have been so brilliant. Ben Jonson, I think it was, said he had little Latin and less Greek, and all this stuff. And I think it's a canard. I think that...
just snobbery.
Just snobbery, basically, yeah. It's never really had... I mean, look, you can put together a conspiracy theory out of anything. It's never really had any basis in fact except that incredible idea that it couldn't have been done. And it couldn't have been done. It's an amazing... It's kind of like E equals MC squared. How do you think about that sitting in a patent office, just fooling around? How do you come up with that? And I think Shakespeare is the same way. Yes, look, John Keats, probably the second greatest poet in the English language. He was a pharmacist, basically. He was a stabler's son, and they said to him, "Go back to your stables. Go back to your apothecary, John Keats." That was the critique of his poems. Back to your apothecary, John Keats. And I just think that's just a strain in English thought that has nothing to do with the truth.
Well, I would certainly agree with you that the fact that he's not nobility would incline people to believe that there might be somebody else. But the evidence I've heard I thought was rather compelling in terms of it not being. But look, I think this is the point, right? That's the line is great. Like I've heard it before too. It's like Thomas. The light bulb wasn't invented by Thomas Edison. It was invented by another guy with the same name.
Yeah.
The point of the matter is, somebody wrote those books. Whether that was a guy who was actually a William Shakespeare guy who wrote under the name of William Shakespeare, and I need to look into it a little more, but whatever the case may be, one individual wrote those lines. And that is without question the single greatest breakout genius in the world of literature that's ever existed. You can go with Newton and Einstein and these other great physicists in terms of breakout intellects for science, but in the world of the human heart and discovering the commonalities that all of us have, he's unequaled and unlikely to ever be equaled. And the genius of Shakespeare to me is that he can put, as you said, he can put you into a Moor, he can put you into a Dane, he can put you into a Jewish lawyer in Venice, he can put you into a fat old man in the court of Henry IV. He can put you into all of these characters and he can put you into an enchanted island in the middle of nowhere. He can take the essence of what it is to be human and set it in ancient Rome and set it anywhere. And in a weird sort of way, I never thought about this till just a second, it's kind of the essence of conservatism, right? The idea that the thing doesn't change, that the Greeks essentially were the same material as we are and that they had the same experiences that we did. And the idea that Shakespeare can take this essence of humanity and place it in any given time or space, historically or in the future fantasy world, whatever, and still have it be humanity facing the same issues every time is the genius of the guy.
Yeah, and Newtonian is a good comparison. He was a genius on the level of Newton, which is just comes along once every few centuries, really.
Yeah, that's right. That's all we have time for today, but you can always let us know what questions you'd like answered in the comment section located below. For Andrew Klavan and PJTV, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for watching.